Welcome to Asenso Tayo Leaders, where we bring you real stories from leaders like you so you can lead with more clarity, direction, and confidence.
Welcome to the Asenso Tayo Leaders podcast. I am Michael Back and I am here with Maria Soro. Good morning, Maria. How are you today?
Good morning, Becky. I'm good. How about you? How's your morning?
It's been good. This is a fantastic way to start the day. I've been looking forward to this one for a couple of weeks now. So yeah, can't wait to get into it.
Yeah, fabulous.
So when we mapped out the podcast and the different types of episodes we wanted to do, one of the ideas we really liked was called an Ask Us Anything. And our vision for that was we could send a message out to the leaders at 5 Elk or our community and get them to ask us questions or send through ideas for topics or episodes that they would like us to cover. Well, we've arrived at our first Ask Us Anything episode. We have reverse engineered this one off the back of a survey. So we recently ran some leadership training, the very first workshop in our Asenso Tayo Leadership Masterclass. And we got people to do a bit of a task afterwards just to kind of finalize some of their learnings and the activities we had during the workshop. And we just had one innocent question at the end, which was if there's anything you'd like to add before completing this survey. It got some lovely praise and feedback. And so you and I looked at each other and thought, you know what, this could be a really good podcast episode. So what we've done today is handpicked 3 of those questions that we thought were really interesting for us to dig into, and really just conversation starters for us to unpack our own experiences and thoughts on these topics and hopefully help the person who asked the question in the first place.
Yes. And we never know, Becky, that maybe there are some of those who also have the same question, but they did not put that in. So I think this would really be helpful.
Absolutely. And we obviously don't have the benefit of clarifying the question with the person. So apologies in advance if we go completely off track and answer the question in the completely wrong direction. But you know what? Our inboxes are always open. So if you have other questions or if we haven't quite hit the mark in terms of how we've answered it, hopefully we still say something useful that can spark an idea or create some sort of a shift in you. But this isn't the last Ask Us Anything episode that we'll do. So we are very willing to keep doing these as questions keep popping up. So if you have questions, if you have things that you would like us to cover, please let us know. We will love, love, love to attack them on our podcast. So without further ado, we should get stuck into our first question. And Maria, this one is about that good old friend of most of us, imposter syndrome. So here's the question, Maria. One of the habits that we can practice to address our imposter syndrome is to keep a file of our achievements, small or big wins, great feedback from mentors, etc. Personally, I don't do that because it only makes me feel like I've ticked something off my to-do list. Instead of feeling satisfied that I did it, all I feel is I finally finished that task. It's like there's no sense of fulfillment. How do I steer away from this mindset?
I'm sure a lot of those who attended the workshop would also have the same question. I'm pretty sure. Because when we ask about who here does feel like the imposter is also around, that unwanted guest. And there were a lot of hands, Becky, if you remember that. So I think this is a really good one to kick off this podcast episode.
Absolutely.
And what would you say to this person with this question, Becky?
Well, my instant reaction when I hear this question is high achiever. This is someone who is constantly thinking, what's next? What have I got to do? So I suppose my first comment on this is, you're not broken. This isn't uncommon. If you talk about those A-type personalities, people who want to be the best and achieve a lot, they're constantly future focused rather than past focused. And I think they could see feedback as somewhat of a waste of time because it's not actually productive in them getting the job done. But I also want to validate this question because it's a weird analogy, but I think it works. But the way that I like to think of this question is in terms of the love languages. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the love languages, there was a person who, I think his name was Gary Chapman, who posited that people interpret messages of love in different ways, and they have a default way that resonates with them in terms of how they want to show love and appreciation for others and how they like to receive and be treated by others as well. And those 5 love languages are words of affirmation, quality time, receiving gifts, and acts of service. Basically, what that means is if someone's love language is quality time and you're there buying them nice gifts and saying how much you love them, but all they want is quality time, you can be thinking, oh, I'm showing love for that person. But because that person's default love language is quality time, if you're not spending enough time with them, they don't feel loved or appreciated by you. Very weird deviation in this episode, so stick with me. But what I'm saying here is that not everyone's love language is words of affirmation. And so for the person who wrote this question, maybe when you get compliments, when you get praise, when your boss or someone in your team thanks you, maybe that just doesn't resonate or land with you the way it would for others. And that's completely fine. I think what I would firstly say is one of the ideas we shared in the workshop for combating imposter syndrome, this feeling of we're not good enough and we're completely unqualified for what we're doing, and we need to put on this show and almost put on this facade to the rest of the world that we are qualified, because otherwise we're going to get found out and it's going to cause all this shame. One of the strategies we had to combat that is you've got this really negative inner voice, and one of the ways to kind of even the scales and to counterbalance that unproductive voice is to bring in evidence to suggest that perhaps that voice is wrong. So yeah, kind of bringing in your own strengths, bringing in feedback from others, bringing in anything that potentially makes that inner voice feel like it's not 100% correct. And it's not about conquering that inner voice and having this supreme confidence and positivity about our abilities, but taking the negative edge off to an extent that we can focus on more productive actions and behaviors. And so I think tipping that scale in the other direction is the only solution to imposter syndrome. I mean, one of the ways that we talked about in the workshop of tipping the scales is to actually just realize that everyone else has imposter syndrome. So you're not holding on to that feeling of I'm broken, there's something wrong with me, but to actually just go, yeah, we're all in this and we're all feeling this way. That actually can take a lot of the sting out and start tipping those scales. But for the person who submitted this question, the idea of keeping a file was one idea, but if that idea doesn't resonate with you, there are other ways we can help tip those scales. It doesn't have to be praise or compliments or this sense of I'm doing a good job from other people. And so you need to set your goalposts somewhere else to feel more fulfilled in what you're doing. For the person who's writing this, I don't want you to wait until later in your career to have that moment. I don't want you to hit that wall where you go, I'm burnt out because I've constantly been focused on what's next. I'd love to help you create that moment now where you're starting to tip the scales and realize that getting your task done and achieving a lot is important, but there are other things that are important that you need to give attention to as well.
That's a really great answer, Becky. And I think I've mentioned this in some of the episodes around the validation. And I think often people really underestimate how validation also applies to ourselves. And as you've mentioned, Becky, it's not really about just completely turning yourself into that most positive person, most energetic person in the office one day, all of a sudden, right after the workshop. But it's just getting that, probably starting off with really the awareness and looking into what are those areas of validation that I need to look into and to allow that in my mind so that I can shift the scale or balance the scale. And then from there, you'd feel good. You'd feel some fulfillment. And I resonate so much in this question, Becky. I just like to say that because I'm also not a fan of, praises. I have this awkward, weird reaction if somebody praises me. I don't really find it that relevant. So that was one of the things that I was also trying to work on. But when it comes to work, some of the things that I slowly try to work out, since I know that I'm not the kind of person who really feeds off those compliments and praises, I then shifted to thinking of, hey, what about I look into the effect of the actual tasks that I ticked off my list? So say, for example, okay, I ticked off this certain document. And then the next bit, spoken to a couple of people about it. And then looking at the benefit that person's also using that same template when, it's being discussed in a one-on-one conversation and things like that. And for me, that's where I finally found, okay, that's some sense of fulfillment I can cling on to. This is good enough. And slowly, progressively, that was helping one day at a time.
Yeah, I think that's a really good message is that with some of these strategies that you're going to try, if you're going to judge them in a week's time as to whether they worked or not, you've probably been too impatient and you'll just be this person who just tries all these different things and none of them work. And then you'll give up on improvement ever being possible. But patience is such an important aspect here. And particularly for these A-type, high achieving personality, patience isn't necessarily always the strength. Sometimes there's an impatience there. But I think you bring up a really good point that the best things in life often take time. And this is another example of that. I think that I remember once working with someone who was really frustrated and she was feeling hopeless at the end of one day. And I'm just getting so frustrated because I come in every day wanting to get through my to-do list. And by the end of the day, I'm just not feeling this sense of accomplishment because there's always more to do. And the CEO said to her, I won't say her name, let's just call her Julie. Julie, if your to-do list ever gets empty, that's when we all should start worrying. And I think that's a really important point is that we have this part of our brain that wants to feel complete. We just want to feel like we've got everything done and there's nothing more to do. But if you're in a growing business that there's a lot of different things happening and it's interesting and there's always new projects and new frontiers and a new benchmark of success. And so setting your benchmark of getting through your to-do list or getting your task done, that will never, ever be done. And so realize now that you're playing a game that you will never be able to win. But going back to your point, I completely agree. Like, I think there is the game of getting through your tasks today. That's the game I don't think you're ever going to win because there's always going to be more tasks. But think about the reason behind those tasks. And I dare say it's similar to what we talked about in our workshop with the 5 whys test. So for those of you who weren't part of the workshop, we talked about getting to your why, your purpose, the real difference that you choose to make as a leader. It's a questioning technique of asking why over and over again until you get the goosebumps and go, oh yeah, that's the difference I want to make. This is the real purpose of me being a leader. I think you can apply that same thinking to why are you doing the tasks on your list and keep going deeper and deeper and deeper. So Maria, like you and I could have come in this morning and gone, oh, got this podcast to record. And that doesn't really carry an important energy. But if you go, well, hold on, but why are we recording the podcast? Well, there were 3 people who submitted questions in a survey and we can actually help them. All of a sudden, that podcast feels a little bit more important. But then you can go even deeper and go, well, hopefully most or all of our leaders and people outside of the business are going to listen to this. And you go, wow, we can actually help hundreds of people, thousands of people become better leaders through having a conversation. That feels like a pretty exciting opportunity to make a difference in people's lives. And so connecting to the deeper purpose behind the tasks that you're doing, whatever role you're in, it's not going to ever stop that feeling of going, I've got to get more tasks done. But it kind of tips those scales and brings in some extra thought and some different goalposts to go, well, am I measuring my success against doing my tasks? Or am I comparing what I'm doing towards this deeper, bigger purpose behind why I'm doing the tasks? And I think keeping that top of mind is really important. Now, some people have leaders who are really good at constantly bringing their team back to the vision and going, well, this is why we're doing all of this. And this is why all the hard work is worth it. Some leaders aren't particularly good at that, though. They are very task focused and they're just focusing in the now. And a lot of the messages that we have through the Asenso Tayo Leadership Masterclass and podcast is the same, is that you're both receiving end of leadership, but you're also on the delivery end. So I suppose for those of you who aren't being connected to that vision frequently from your leader, make sure you're doing that for yourself. And if you have questions and you're not actually clear on what the vision is for the team or why those tasks are important or what the bigger picture is of what you're doing each day, ask your leader and make sure you're clear on that so at least you can connect to it. But then if you've got other people in your team who potentially aren't as connected to the vision as they should be, make sure you're constantly reminding them of what's important as well.
Yeah. I think there's a lot that we got out of that question. So thank you so much, whoever sent through that question. I'm sure many of those who are listening, from those who attended the workshop, and for sure everybody who would be given a chance to listen to this would so relate to everything that Becky just mentioned. Again, this is not just for leaders who actually have a team, but you yourself, you can apply it. Even if you're a team member, if you're somebody who's executing the task or somebody who's part of a group or part of a department, this also applies to you for sure. And I'd like to add to that as well. I think one of the things is if you also would just keep comparing yourself to what you are not. And I think I mentioned this in our previous episode, Becky. One of the things that Roy asked me back then was, what was the question when you want to tell your younger self kind of thing? And one of the things I answered in that episode was about the what if I'm not kind of thing. So I think relating to this is if you keep looking into what you are not and you don't look at who you were in the past, going through memory lane of who you were in the past and who you are at this stage right now, at this moment in time, you will never get that satisfaction. But if you look at what was a Maria back then, I was just Danielle's assistant. I was also a CSA. I did not really know much about how to manage people in financial planning. I did not know how to speak to Aussies, for one. And then to now, look at this. I'm talking to Becky every single day. And I think this is really great progress. So something like that. And I think, again, it's not just for people who have a certain title. Looking back, I was like this and now I'm this. No, not exactly. But just go back through what were your wins? Small wins, personal growth. What were you back then and what you are right now? And if you cling on that idea and that thought and that walking through memory lane, I think that's a really powerful thing to bring the scales, to tip the scales a little bit more day by day to that more positive direction as opposed to that uninvited guest winning or making the other side of the scale heavier.
Yeah, I absolutely love that idea. The energy of this question around like, I don't want to be like focusing on, all these compliments and stuff like that. I just want to get the job done. But I also acknowledge that that can sometimes be unfulfilling. It sounds like the type of question that a CEO would ask because a lot of CEOs have this type of energy. And I can tell you from working very closely with a lot of CEOs. So I'm kind of a nostalgic guy. So this one comes really naturally to me. I'm always looking back and acknowledging how far things have come. And I think I've almost without even realizing I'm doing it. So when we go through a strategic planning process, everything's about, what do we want to achieve for the next year and how are we going to break that down to a 90-day plan? It's all very forward focused, but I always make sure I start that session with a look back on how far we've come and the progress we've made and highlighting achievements. And the energy of the CEO often at the start of that process is kind of like, oh God, this is a waste of time. Can we just get onto the strategy stuff? Can we get on the stuff that's going to put stuff on my to-do list? But as you get into that and when you get towards the end of that process of looking back, you actually feel this, I can't even describe it, but it's like a warmth and a connection and a bonding feeling amongst the team where you go, wow, like we are doing really good things. And every single time someone will say, oh gosh, I forgot how much we've got done in the last 12 months, or oh, I forgot how far we've come since this time last year. And there seems to be this blind spot where we constantly are focusing on what we're not doing rather than what we have done. And now, when I say that there's this kind of resistance at the start over time, once people go through that process and CEOs go through this process enough times, they start to look forward to it because they understand how important it is and they see the impact it has on the people around them. But that is a muscle that you need to build. It just takes time to have that shift where you go, oh yeah, it's important to do that. So for the person who's asked this question, going back down memory lane and looking at where you were in your career 12 months, 18 months, 2 years ago, and then comparing that to now might feel uncomfortable at first, but it's going to create this positivity over time if you stick to it. And again, just having that patience to keep doing it consistently, but it will make a difference. I absolutely promise you. And it's so important that you're not just comparing yourself against what you haven't achieved and what you haven't done, but the progress you have made, because I know the person who asked this question and I know how much progress they've made. But even if I didn't know you, I could almost guarantee that you have made far more progress and you've achieved way more than you realize. But I acknowledge that someone else's words might not make you feel that way. So it's important that you use your inner voice and you give yourself that feeling of achievement, accomplishment, fulfillment that's going to start taking the edge off that imposter syndrome.
So we have the next question here, Becky, and I'm going to read it out. says, I'm going to be a bit vulnerable here. I didn't see this to be under any of the myths we discussed, but another challenge I face is that I often catch myself thinking, oh, I'm good, but not excellent. I'm a good employee, but I think there's this person behind this and that person. So those comparisons tend to take my confidence and my doubt on my own worth. I'm hoping we can cover this. Ooh, that's also very juicy, Becky, and pretty much related to the first question that we have answered.
Yeah, I think it's
Mhm.
like the cousin of that. I think the relationship between these two questions to me is, what are you choosing as your basis for comparison? Are you comparing yourself against something external, or are you comparing yourself against something internal?
Yeah, and I think this is pretty much the same. I think this person is also a type A person, an achiever. And I want to start off, Becky, by answering this question by saying, whoever you are answering this question, give yourself a pat on the back. Being vulnerable really, truly does not show weakness, but it is truly strength. Such a huge strength to be vulnerable to everybody. And, one of the things in that workshop that gave me the goosebumps, Becky, was for the most part, there are those leaders in that group who have strong personalities, or probably I'd say they are really the tough cookies. But then they really gave their self into giving the realization. So I want to kick off by saying, good on you for asking this question. You're vulnerable, yes, but this is never a sign of weakness. And this is the whole thing that we want to get out of every session that we have with Becky and I, that you can be as vulnerable as you can be. So, first and foremost, I want to talk about, there's this whole thing about being trapped in the comparison. It's always going to be like that shadow clouds your minds and always keeps us away from all the good side that we actually have.
I'm going to bring this one back to the leaders I've worked with. They are all completely different. And some of them I'll say, oh, they are the best at building a team and a culture, but they're not so good at coaching their team. Others, I would say, they are the best at sales, marketing, brand, and growth, but they really need to get better at their interpersonal skills, that they're really good at the outward stuff, but not so good at the inward stuff. The point being is that, firstly, there is no perfect leader, right? We have strengths. Some people realize the potential of those strengths and double down on them and create a lot of success. But there's always things that people need to work on as well. What I would also say, though, is that we can have this tendency to look at people around us and think that they are better. And maybe we're only focusing on the things that they're really good at, but we're just not seeing the things that they're not so good at. So I suppose for this person, the thing that I would like to start with is to say, don't compare your raw footage to someone else's highlights reel, because when you are looking at all these people being better than you, they might be better than you at some things, but I guarantee that there are so many things that you're better at than them. But also, there's not this one path where it's like there's this 10-step process and you need to nail all these 10 steps, and someone else is at step 6 and you're at step 2. It's not that simple either, that there is an outcome that you're trying to achieve, whether it's being successful at the projects you're working at, or managing a team, or achieving goals, or taking your part of the business from this point to this point. There's not one type of person who's required for that. You need to fit that mold. Ultimately, the only way that you're going to be able to lead your team from where you are to where you want to be is by getting better at what you do, not comparing yourself to other people. And so at the end of the day, I think you are probably oversimplifying the people around you and them being better than you. I think if you were to spend enough time with these people and to truly unpack what they're good at, what they're not good at, what they struggle with, what they don't struggle with, and compare it to yourself, you would actually feel a lot better about yourself, because you'd go, oh, I've put you on this pedestal, but really you're not that different to me. It's just you have different strengths than me, but I also have strengths that you don't have. I think you'd be really surprised. But I also would say that you can spend a lot of energy focusing on other people and I don't know who said this, but I heard it once, and I think it's a really useful model, is that the only thing we should focus on if we actually want to improve is the intersection of things we can control and things that matter. So there are some things we can control, but if they don't matter, there's no point focusing on them. There's some things that matter, but if we can't control them or if we can't have any influence on them, there's really no point putting our energy into it because it's not going to make any difference. So in any aspect of life, we need to find that intersection between what matters, what can I can control, and put our energy there. And if someone is different than us and has different strengths than us, I would say, firstly, does that matter? Maybe, maybe not, but can we control that? Can we control someone else's strengths and their performance? No, we can't. So you can put a lot of attention there. And my gosh, like most of the world is constantly flicking through magazines and scanning social media and going, oh, I wish I was like that. I wish I looked like Beyonce. I wish I could sing like that. And you can spend a lot of energy doing that, but it doesn't actually make a difference. So I think you just need to question how much value you get out of directing your energy towards comparison and other people, because ultimately you can't really control that. What you can control is yourself and how you respond. And I think that's a much more productive and meaningful way to think about what's next for you.
Yeah. And I also think, Becky, that it's also related to your goal. What are your aspirations? It's not going to be the same for sure. It's kind of like that ideology about going back to your training, Becky, around you're the captain. You're wearing the captain hat. The captain of the plane does not necessarily need to compare where the route of the other captain or where that direction is going to. So, for example, you're going to Kenya and you are the driver of that. And if the other captain is going to Australia, for example, then that's that. Like, they never would need to know or need to talk about their route. But pretty much what I'm saying is, if that is your route and you think that this is your avenue and your strength and, where you want to take things further, then focus on that. Do not allow the reflection of the other captains to the other direction divert your energy, because this is your plane and this is your route and this is what you can control and what you can hang on to.
Yeah, exactly. I think something else that I'd love to know if this resonates with you, Maria, but I sometimes think with this one too, it can be grounded in a feeling of it's embarrassing to admit that I'm not where I want to be. And so it's this about having this persona of I've got it all together and not showing weakness. And so I would say the first aspect for you to look at is, are you 100% sure you're not as good at them, or are you just looking at their highlights reel, but you're not looking at the journey and you're oversimplifying that person and where they're at, and you're not seeing the full picture? But I think there's another step after that. So once you've done that, I also think if you're not that good at something, it takes a lot of braveness and courage to actually just go, yeah, I'm not good at that. And this is why I'm interested in whether you can relate to this, Maria, because I think I spent a long time in my career trying to be this guy who had it all together and I've cracked the code and, work with me and I will show you the code. And a lot of the time there were aspects of that where I was like, oh, I'll just kind of fake it till I make it. But I would say that as I've got more confident in myself and courageous enough to say to people, actually, that area is not my strength. Or, oh, you know what, I'd love to be good at that, but I'm just not good at that. It changes the whole energy of what you're working on from I've got to hide how bad I am at this and figure out how to do it. And it feels risky and it feels stressful and it feels like you've got this secret that you're trying to hide. But the second you actually open up and go, I'm not that good at this thing, most of the time the people around you go, oh, cool. Okay. Yeah. Do you know what? I'm good at that thing. So let me share this book that really helped me. Oh, you need to listen to this podcast. Or do you know what? I struggle with that too. And here's 5 things that I've done. And hey, I'd be happy to help you with this and check in with you every now and then, see how you're going. It's just a much more effective way of growing. I think sometimes it's misfounded, our belief that we're not as good as others, but there are some parts of our role where we're just not as good at others. If someone was to judge you negatively and make you feel bad for admitting you're not good at something, that's not the type of person you want to work with. honestly, that's a horrible type of human who's going to make you feel bad for putting your hand up and going, I need help with something. Who wants to work with someone like that? Who wants to spend time with someone like that?
Yes.
So I think maybe the solution to this one is not assuming that everyone else has it all figured out, because most people don't. But maybe the solution too is putting your hand up and not just going, I've got this overwhelming sense of not being good enough, but choosing an area and going, actually, I feel really unconfident at this. Because putting your hand up and being brave enough to do that will start a conversation with a leader or a colleague or someone around you to go, oh, cool. Well, I actually have had a similar struggle and I think these things would help. And then at least, talking about where you put your energy into something that's unproductive or productive. I can't think of anything more productive than putting your energy into something where you put your hand up and said, I want to get better at this. And then you're actually following a process or sticking to a series of steps that are going to get you better at that.
I just want to say this as well, Becky, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners are also, our internal team members, a lot are Filipinos. And I think one of the cultural aspect is that when we are given something, we're given a task, for example, or a certain role, we say yes to it. A default would be, okay, yes. And whatever it is, we'll say yes, yes, yes. So kind of like we put ourselves to that high expectation straight off the bat without realizing that there are areas that we can be vulnerable and we can say, well, I said yes to this role. However, there are aspects of this that I need help on. One of the things that in general, again, I'm saying this because it's a beautiful trait as well. But in line with that beautiful trait as a Filipino, there's also that side of it that would potentially not be that helpful and would lead to you feeling like you're not good enough and you feeling like you would need to compare to somebody who's good in that specific area that you aren't, as opposed to just saying, yes, I'm happy to do this, but there are aspects that I need help and there are aspects that I need to lean on somebody else, some experts probably, or somebody else in the team. And this is one of the things that I think we're getting better at as well on the ground, Becky. And you mentioned about all the support with such a huge weave of support, not just internally, but out to everybody else. I think this really helps that barrier of that vulnerability. People are really starting to break that and really open up to areas wherein they are uncomfortable.
Yeah. And I think sometimes that, I've got to say yes, because otherwise I look like I'm not a good employee or I'm not a good team member. I think that's a lovely attitude, but I don't think that weakens your yes by saying, look, I'm really happy to do this and I would love to try this, but just so you know, I'm not particularly strong at this. So could I get some help with that? The person that has allocated the task to you isn't going to go, oh gosh, you've been negative. They're like, well, no, you've said yes. Like, I appreciate the fact that you're leaving your comfort zone and you're happy to try doing this. So I don't think you lose that sense of service and that attitude of positivity that we all value in a good team member by saying, yeah, I can do this, but I need help with that. I think it's still a really positive conversation. And I think your leader would really respect the fact that you're willing to give something a go, even though you don't know how to do it. In fact, it might even more positive than saying, yeah, I'm happy to do this because I know how to do it. It might actually say more about you
Exactly
in a positive sense than you realize. Have you had an experience with acknowledging that there's part of your role that you felt like you weren't good enough at?
I've got to say, I'll share this story. Back in the days, so imagine 5 was so young and we did not have our lovely marketing and events team, right? So there's nobody else. It's just me and Danielle ultimately working on task. And I think she was jumping into one webinar to another. She asked me to create some of the slides. Of course, she did give her feedback, but she asked me to create the base of it. I think she was testing me. And that was that moment. That was the first time at 5 I was like, oh my gosh, I don't have any creative juices at all. And I was like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do here? Am I going to be any use to her? And then later on, I said, Danielle, do you expect me to make this look really pretty? And she said, no, I just need you to put the text in it and blah, 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 and something like that. Initially, it really felt uncomfortable for me to be given that task to be creative, which I thought that was the expectation but thankfully I asked. So I just felt in that moment of like, oh my gosh, I'm exposing myself to Danielle knowing that I'm so not creative at all.
But I often think you can tell someone's design skills by how they present. You always present very well. You're always very put together. So I think maybe creativity takes many formats, right? I was reflecting on this when I read the question too. I've had a very similar experience than the person who shared the question, in the sense of when I was a business coach, I was constantly looking at the other coaches in the industry, and they were very numbers focused and all about profitability. And there's very much like almost an accounting slant on business coaching. And what I was very good at compared to them, I would say, is the human aspect. So the people and helping build a culture and helping connect to your market, and very much the interpersonal, because that's my experience, right? I did a psychology degree at uni. So that's clearly something I'm interested in. It's something that I have been more familiar with. When I started out coaching, the numbers side of things just wasn't even the conversation I was having. But I would say that for me, building more confidence as a coach, there was kind of a two-pronged approach. One was I started respecting the numbers a bit more and making the work we did more measurable and less fluffy and airy-fairy, and making it a lot more tangible, just to make sure that we weren't just wasting time and energy, and what we were doing was actually making somewhat of a positive difference. So in some sense, I haven't really given much thought to the numbers side of what I'm doing. And I realized that that was some kind of growth that I needed to go on. And so I focused on it, and I got coaching in that area, and I brought a lot more measurability into my coaching. But then by the same token, I also don't want to go too far in that direction, that I'm just playing the game that they're playing and leaving my own strengths under the table and not utilizing them. So I think for me, the journey was about acknowledging that I wasn't as focused on the numbers and needed to be more focused on the numbers, but also not discounting what I brought to the table that others weren't naturally bringing to the table. And so bringing this back to the question, and I think this is a really nice way of wrapping up a lot of this conversation, is I think it's easy to look at what you're not good at and potentially putting your hand up and going, yeah, I'm not that good at that bit and I want to get better at that bit, is much more productive than just focusing on the difference. Actually getting really clear on the difference and what you want to focus on, and putting your hand up and sharing it with the people around you so you can get better at that, is an important step. But, it's kind of like our first question too, where we're talking about comparison and the benchmark that you set for yourself. I think don't discount the things that you are doing potentially better than others in similar roles, and make sure that you are aware of what you are bringing to the table that perhaps others can't, so you don't lose that and you can keep doing that, because they're probably looking at aspects of what you're doing and going, she's really great at these things, I'm only good at these things. Make sure that you're focused on the things that you're great at as well, because similar to my last one, I do know the person who asked this, and I can tell you that they are absolutely great at a lot of things. But even if I didn't know you, I promise you that you're great at a lot of things, and you're maybe just not giving those enough attention. All right. So our third question for this episode, Maria, what would you say to a person like me who is always waiting to feel ready? What best practice or advice can you share about breaking the need to feel ready before attempting to do anything?
One of the helpful thing and the shift that I want to kick off is with regards to how you shift your mindset on redefining readiness as willingness as opposed to perfection. Okay, and I think, again, everybody would just also come to a point in their life that they would ask, am I ready for this? But how about shift the question to try asking yourself, am I willing to try? Am I willing to learn? Am I willing to fail? And am I willing to grow? And I really think, Becky, there's a subtle power there when you start to reframe, really helps to turn action into practice rather than just thinking of action immediately showcases performance. And to give an example to that, I'd say one of the things I felt that I was not ready was when I was speaking to clients. Initially, I really felt like it was beyond my comfort zone, but I did it anyway. But one of the things that I asked is around asking, am I willing to grow? And what am I willing to do to get that growth? So, one of the things that I thought behind the scenes when I was in that client experience phase, I made an effort to look into what is the most powerful thing as part of being in client experience that would be really beneficial. And one of the things that I found, Becky, was I found that there's really that connection of client conversation and here and there client support into the art of like negotiation. I don't think I've shared this to anyone, but I enrolled in this one that is around Black Swan. It's actually a masterclass done by an FBI negotiator, Chris Voss. I did that because I felt like, okay, to be able to get to that part of that question and to answer that question, am I willing to grow? What am I willing to do? So that was what I was willing to do. So outside of work, I enrolled myself in that masterclass, and there was just a lot of tips on how to negotiate. Because I think when you deal with not just clients, probably, I think when you deal with people every day, there's always some negotiation that would happen. May it be talking about your idea or just saying no to something, even a difficult conversation sometimes also really needs some negotiation. So, yeah, that's how I would relate to this. And that's the story that I think would relate to this question.
I want to jump on what you just said there around the idea of failure, because I think everyone hates the idea of failure, right? And the fear of failure holds us back in almost every area of our life. But I think it's an interesting question, like, what is failure?
I would define failure if I already closed my mind, that if it's already me telling myself that there's no more, like, I'm just going to stay here. I'm just going to stay stagnant and I'm not going to do anything. I'm not willing to do anything. I don't want to talk to this person. I don't want to deal with that. I think that for me is failure. Like when you just don't want to do anything or you don't want to move, you don't want to grow.
I think that's a really useful definition of failure, because to me, failure is when you want to achieve something and you fall short.
Yeah.
And there is no way to rectify it. And if you look at failure in those terms, right, that it's kind of like finite, it's the end, there's no chance to fix it. By doing nothing and not trying to achieve something, you are currently failing because you're not making a difference. It's that there is an end line because you haven't started the process of trying to achieve it. So at the moment, you are failing in that area already. So we're kind of not acting because we're worried of failing, but really by doing nothing, we are by default failing. I don't want to get caught in semantics here, but I think sometimes we put too much emphasis on us trying something and it's not going well, and then that's the end of the story. If we commit to, well, I'm going to do my best, and if that doesn't work, that's okay because I get the chance to dust myself up and get up again and try again. You never fail. You fail if you stop. You fail if you don't take action in the first place. But if you try something and it doesn't work and then you stop there may be a definition where you say, yeah, I've failed. But if you commit to the process of anytime I stumble and fall, I'll get back up and keep going, you're never going to fail. Over the long term, if you keep doing that and you just don't stop until you get to the point you've achieved it, yeah, you've had some setbacks on the way, but you haven't failed. But if you're zooming out and looking at it over the long term and going, I'm going to try and do this in 3 months, but if it doesn't work in 3 months, I'm happy to give myself 6, 12, 18, 24. It takes the pressure off a lot. And you know what? Most of the time, 99% of the time, it's not a sink or swim situation we're putting ourselves in. We have the opportunity to try it. If it doesn't work, we tweak it and we try again. So I think if you just commit to, like you said, that process of constant improvement and doing your best, the thing that we are most scared of being failure isn't actually even a real thing. The reason I put in the workshop this whole bit about taking action before you're ready is because that's a lesson I've had to learn the hard way. There are 2 things that I have found to be useful. They're almost like brain hacks. I don't know if these are the healthiest strategies to feel more ready, but they've worked for me. So I'm happy to share them. One is, I think this concept of feeling ready, there's like 2 stages of feeling ready. One is feeling ready to say, yes, I can do something. And once you've said that, and said to someone, yeah, I'm going to do this, kind of like what we said in a previous question around, just putting your hand up and going, yeah, I'm willing to give this a shot. I actually think that's a lot harder than the second phase, because once you've said, yes, you're going to do something, now I've got to figure out how I'm going to do it. And then that's the second stage of being ready, is actually putting in the work and practicing and trying something and creating a draft version of what we're trying to achieve and showing it to someone, getting feedback and improving it. And that version of being ready, that bit's actually pretty easy, because it's really just about hard work and discipline and consistency and trying things, but put a lot of effort into something and it's going to make you feel more ready. But the hardest bit is the one in the first place, where you put your hand up and say, yep, I'm going to commit to doing this. That's actually the hard bit. And so the hack that I have figured out is to just say to people, yes, I can do things, and then figure out the details later. Now, like we said, that doesn't need to be a private process. You don't need to just go, oh yeah, I can do this, and then freak out behind the scenes. You could actually be really open about that. The second one that I think here is, I very rarely feel perfectly ready for something, because similar to our friend from question 1, I sometimes have the mindset of going, I can envisage the type of person who'd be perfect at this. Something that I found really useful, and again, I don't know if this is healthy, but it works for me, is I place possibly more, actually, definitely more trust in the people around me than I place in myself. So if the people around me think I'm ready to do something, I trust in the fact that they know what is required, that they can see something in me that potentially I can't see in myself. And so in that moment, I will just go, okay, I don't agree that I'm ready for this, but I believe in you. So if you think I'm ready, I'm just going to accept that that's true.
Yeah.
So that's enough for me to go, yep, I can do that. And then I figure out the details later. Once you get stuck into something, the process of feeling ready for it and prepared for it is really just a case of time and effort. But again, like, I just think taking that first step is always the hardest bit, is the committing to something. So whether it's just getting better at saying yes and figuring out the details later, or whether it's just trusting other people's judgment that I'm ready for it, even if I don't feel that way, I just try and get through the initial commitment as quickly as possible. And then my energy doesn't go to, oh God, I don't feel like I can do this too. Well, you know what? You're doing it because you've already said you're going to do it. So don't put your energy into whether you're the right person. Put your energy into the steps that are going to get you to deliver on this thing that you said you're going to do. Most of the time, if you put in enough time and effort, you're going to get a much better outcome than you expect. As long as you take the lessons from that, you learn, you grow, you improve, you dust yourself off, get up and try again. You haven't failed. You're just growing. You're just iterating. You're just on this journey of getting to the point. And one day you'll look back and go, that was actually a far less linear journey than I thought it was. That becomes the reward, not the goal that you were trying to achieve. It's that journey and that process. That's the bit that builds real confidence. And I definitely see that in you too, that I've noticed you often will, if someone else thinks you're capable of doing something, you will defer to their judgment and then figure out the details later. So I don't know, maybe that this isn't a weird strategy. Maybe this is something that is more common than we realize.
I hope we've answered everything that these guys were really hoping for. And as I've mentioned earlier, that I'm sure there would be others who have the same question. So I hope our answers have helped you. And we're really looking forward in our next sessions at Asenso Tayo Leadership Masterclass. Please don't hesitate to bring in more of these questions, and we will keep doing our best to give you whatever we can and to provide you some inputs and also some of our experience that will help you realize that, again, ultimately, we're all just figuring it out. Such a great time with you, Becky. Thank you so much. And thank you for giving a lot of your inputs, your insights, and also your experience and sharing a lot of those moments that we never really knew about you. So this is really good. Thank you.